Good evening to all. On behalf of Intas Pharmaceutical Limited, I, Dr. Dhiren Pranami from Medical Affairs team, welcome you all to this live webinar program. The topic of today's webinar is New Era in Therapeutic GI Endoscopy. And to discuss about this topic, we have with us many eminent doctors. As a speaker, we have three speakers for today's program. We have with us Dr. Mukesh Kalla, we have with us Dr. Pankaj Rimal, and we have with us Dr. Alok Verma. Dr. Mukesh Kalla is a consultant gastroenterologist and director at SR Kalla Hospital, and Dr. Pankaj Rimal is also a consultant gastroenterologist and the endoscopist at the same hospital. Dr. Alok Verma is a chief of anesthesia at the SR Kalla Hospital. To moderate today's session, we have with us very senior gastroenterologist with us, Dr. Ramesh Roop Rai. He is the director and professor at the Department of Gastroenterology at Nimans Medical College, Jaipur. I would like to inform all the viewers that there will be a question and answer session after deliberation by doctors. So I request you to please write your question in the comment box. The comment box you can find on the right side of the video that is playing. So on that note, now I'll hand over to Dr. Ramesh to please moderate the session. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, all my friends. This evening, it's a great evening for us that we have enlightening all of us on an important area which is now emerging. The stomach used to be called as a black box where nobody could see inside. Then the endoscopy came in. We started visualizing. Then a new era came in which the therapeutics was added. And now we are able to perform all those things which the surgeons used to do. So now we are endoscopic surgeons. And I'm very happy to introduce the speakers for today who have got a rich experience in the field of endoscopy, and they have done great work and advanced the therapeutic endoscopy to new horizons. And to introduce you is Dr. Mukesh Kalla. He is the chief and director of the gastroenterology division at SR Kalla Memorial Hospital, Jaipur. To say a few words about his achievements, he did his DM from Nair Hospital, Bombay, where he did his DM, and after that he came to Jaipur and started working. He has attained high skills and high training in endoscopy, and now he is working on a specialized field that is third space endoscopy. We'll not go in details about it because he's going to give you us detail what is third space endoscopy. We have Dr. Pankaj Shrimal. He's a senior gastroenterologist and endoscopist at SR Kalla Memorial Hospital. He did his D&B in gastroenterology from a prestigious institution, the Asian Institute of Gastroenterology, in 2016, and since then he has worked in this field. And more importantly, initially everybody used to think that small bowel is unapproachable, but he has worked extensively in this field, and he has done great work in the small intestinal enteroscopy and therapeutic endoscopy in that area. We have to enlighten, because a surgeon is doing his work. He has got a lot of things to do. He's concentrating on his endoscopy and his surgery. An anesthetist is of tremendous use and tremendous importance for him in the endoscopy room because he is taking care of the patient, which is paramount importance. Today we have with us Dr. Alok, who is the chief anesthetist at SR Kalla Memorial Hospital. He is going to enlighten us on the anesthesial part of this, that how we should take care of. Now I'll hand over and will like to next please, that we have divided the new era in endoscopy. Dr. Mukesh, next slide please. The era of new era of GI therapeutic endoscopy. We have divided it. Every week we are going to talk to you. Today, our topic is per oral and endoscopic myotomy, and he's going to give details about it. On 26 June, we have therapeutic potential tips to use cholangioscopy, which is a new era. I will discuss on that day. And I have talked about Dr. Pankaj. He is master of the small bowel therapeutic endoscopy, and there are a lot of potential which can be there, which are unexplored till today. So today we are starting our discussion on POEM, how this new thing is emerging, how we are able to give a important task to endoscopists to perform the surgery. I'll first request Dr. Pankaj to talk about achalasia cardia and what are the important aspects in diagnosis, and then Dr. Mukesh will talk about the management. Yes, Dr. Pankaj, please. Dr. Pankaj. Pankaj, unmute yourself.
So am I audible, sir, right now?
Yes, yes, very well.
Okay. So thank you, Raya, sir. Thank you very much for a very good introduction about myself. And we always look forward to you and look to you as our inspiration in pursuing our gastroenterology. You have been an ideal gastroenterologist for all our upcoming gastroenterologists. And I would like to thank the INTAS people also for organizing such a good event and a good webinar with a lot of audiences are there who are waiting to start this very good event in third space endoscopy. And I would like to thank Dr. Mukesh Kalla and Dr. Alok also for being a part of this good webinar. So in a brief about achalasia cardia, now this is a entity which was known since many years. The patients had dysphagia and it was first reported in 1674. And then Sir Arthur Hurst was the person who coined the term achalasia in 1927. So this is a disease where there is an impaired ileus relaxation, and as the disease progresses, we'll see there is a problem in the motility of the esophageal body also. These two figures of the pathological specimens of esophagectomy are showing that the ileus is tight here in the lower part, and in the upper part you can see the thickness of the muscles which is increased, which we see on surgery and which we see on doing a myotomy in the POEM procedure. So can we go to the next slide, sir? So how to diagnose this problem? So clinical history and physical examination, this is the most important part. And then when we have made our diagnosis clinical of achalasia cardia, then we go for some more investigations to confirm the diagnosis and then make a tailor-made approach for the treatment of the patients. So first of all is the clinical history. So we go to the next slide, and the cardinal symptoms of achalasia are basically the dysphagia, then the regurgitation, retrosternal pain, and weight loss. Now dysphagia occurs because the ileus fails to relax when the patient swallows, and there is a loss of myenteric plexus or orbex plexus neurons. Then as the dysphagia progresses and the disease progresses, the patient may have regurgitation because the esophageal motility is also impaired, and the patient may have a lot of retained food stuff, and the patient when lies down, especially at night, he will have a regurgitation. Now retrosternal pain is a symptom of usually more of a spastic disorders, which includes obviously type 3 achalasia and other motility diseases also like diffuse esophageal spasm or jackhammer esophagus. And because obviously the patient is not able to eat well, they may have a significant weight loss also. To club together, we call this as a Icard score. We can again go to the next thing. So this is the Icard score, which has been used in all of the studies to see the objectivity pre and post procedure. And the Icard score is of up to 12, and less than 3 we keep as a good response to the treatment. Now, apart from these, the patient may have bronchopulmonary complications also because of the repeated aspiration. Although not very common, but the patient may have airway compromise and stridor also if there is a significant food residue, and which may cause extrinsic compression on the trachea, which is a soft tubular stricture. And it's not very common, but obviously there are case reports which have shown that the patient may have stridor also. Now, heartburn is a very common symptom of GERD, and which is against the achalasia physiology. But the hypothesis behind this is that the lot of food is retained in the esophagus, and there is a bacterial fermentation, and they produce some kind of acids and acidic compounds, and the patient may have a heartburn. So you should never forget, if the patient has a dysphagia and he has a heartburn, obviously the patient may have GERD causing a peptic stricture, but the diagnosis of achalasia also should be kept open regarding these features. We go to the next finding. So the next thing is, when a patient comes with these kind of complaints, obviously the first thing is to do an endoscopy. And these images, you can see the various findings we are going to encounter when we put our scope in the patient. Now, the first image, you can see it's a clear esophagus, but it's a dilated esophagus. You can see at 6 o'clock, you can see the impression of the spine. So this is a very common thing. We will find dilated esophagus. We may find food, retained foodstuffs, the picture in the B. And then the second image, the third image is showing some kind of whitish coating over the esophagus, because this is a late achalasia, and the esophageal mucosa is also not normal. And you will find some kind of remnant food particles sticking over the mucosa. To analyze the mucosa, you have to wash it properly, and then you can assess the thing. The next image is showing a tight LES, a tight G junction. And when you insert the scope beyond this, you will have a sudden pop-up feeling. The G junction gives way, and you suddenly enter the stomach. This is a classical of achalasia. And while doing endoscopy in these patients, you should be very well careful to diagnose the pseudoachalasia also. Sometimes you find some kind of extrinsic compression, rule out malignancy also. So you have to be very careful in negotiating the scope across the G junction, as well as to see the mucosa also. And if you have a slightest of doubt, get a CT also done before confirming it as achalasia. And the last picture, bottom right, is showing the prominent tertiary contractions, which you will encounter in a more of earlier achalasia or a spastic achalasia, where you will see type 3 achalasia, you can see a lot of contractions. We go to the next slide. And after endoscopy, now, these are the routine endoscopy. We all are doing a white light endoscopy, but as the Japanese are very they're very good at doing a narrowband imaging, NBI endoscopies. And this was a paper which was published from Inoi's unit, Haruhiro Inoi, who is the pioneer of doing this procedure, POEM procedure in achalasia. So they have analyzed the patients of achalasia, and they have come up with a description of pinstrip pattern. So what is a pinstrip pattern? We go to the next point, and we can see what is a pinstrip image. So these are small vertical lines you can see on the endoscopy, white light endoscopy. If you see a picture A, if you see very carefully, you can see the white lines. But when you apply chroma endoscopy using a methylene blue, and you can see these lines very clearly on NBI endoscopy with a magnification, these lines are very beautifully appreciated. So if you have other features are not matching, the patient may have dysphagia, which is you can say relapsing remitting, because the initial course of achalasia patients, they may have a fluctuating dysphagia. It's not progressive, but as the disease progresses, they will have a progressive dysphagia. At that point of time, if you do endoscopy and you apply narrowband imaging, you see pinstrip pattern. In this study, they have shown almost 65% people, they had this kind of pinstrip pattern suggestive of achalasia. So we'll go to the next slide. And after endoscopy, this has been remained as a standard of investigations right from the old days, doing a barium swallow, commonly available even before the endoscopy era. You ask a patient to swallow barium and then get x-rays done. And the classical teaching for achalasia has been the presence of a bird beak appearance of the G junction, and obviously a poor emptying of the barium. These were the two things which have been taught over the years for diagnosis of achalasia. But the third thing, which is important in today's era for doing endoscopic treatment for POEM, is to assess for a late stage achalasia. You have to see the esophageal anatomy, whether it is tortuous, showing angulation, it is a mega esophagus, or you can say S-shaped esophagus, which are actually, you can say, not straight contraindication, but obviously a relative contraindication for doing a POEM, especially the mega esophagus and the sigmoid esophagus showing a two kind of horizontal curves. So apart from diagnosis, now what else we can achieve by doing a barium? We can go for a timed barium swallow. Now, timed barium swallow, we can ask the patient to swallow the barium and then get X-rays done at a fixed point. So most commonly the X-rays are done at 1, 2, and 5 minutes, and we can see the emptying. Now, most of the people, they will empty the barium by about 2 minutes or so, but almost 100% people, they will empty the barium at 5 minutes. So that's why these standard times are taken. Now you can see the different types of achalasia pattern. The first image is showing a straight esophagus with a classical bird beak appearance near the G junction. Now this is a very good case for doing a poem because the esophagus appears to be very straight. Now the middle figure is showing a S-shaped esophagus. It's a very late case of achalasia. Esophageal motility is hardly there. And again, you will find a technical difficulty in doing a poem in these patients. So to try to avoid doing in this. And then the third image is showing again a case of dilated esophagus with a lot of food residue. You can see the mottled appearance of the esophageal lumen. These are the different things we can see. So we'll go to the next slide and how this timed barium swallow was came into picture. Now this was the original initial article which came in 1997 from American Journal of Rheumatology, and they have done this study and showing that if you do a timed barium swallow and taken the measurements, the inter-observer agreement between the different radiologists, they had used 4 radiologists and they had done their independent reporting based on the protocol which they had made for timed barium swallow. The area calculated, height and the width, and the qualitative estimation which has shown a good correlation coefficient, is almost a perfect correlation, and you can get a good objectivity in doing a diagnosis. Now these are the thing which they had done. The patient should be in erect posture, left posterior oblique films are taken, and about 200 to 250 ml of barium is ingested. Now, it is very important to take an oblique view also to see whether how the esophageal lumen is lying against the spine, because this pattern is also important to see how to do the poem. Dr. Kalla will speak about this in his next slides. So we go to the next slide. Apart from the barium, now this was another study which has shown correlation of types of achalasia with barium esophagogram. Now we have seen esophageal manometry is the gold standard, but this study has shown different types of achalasia showing different types of timed barium esophagogram. So we'll go to the next slide and I'll speak about high resolution manometry. Now this is the gold standard. I will talk about these pictures in the later part. You can go to the next slide, sir. So this is the esophageal manometry. You can see the probe. The probe has different channels. We are using 16-channel water perfusion system. And this is just like a rice tube. You have to put the catheter through the nose. And these are the different channels you can see which are connected to the manometric machine. And you get the reading here. So we'll go to the next slide. I will just spend a minute about the normal esophageal manometry. Now, I hope you are able to see my cursor. Now, important thing in manometry is to see the lower horizontal line, which indicates the G junction, and the upper horizontal line, which indicates the upper esophageal sphincter. Now, these two lines indicate both the sphincters, and in between is the esophageal motility, esophageal body contractions. So as the patient starts to swallow, we can see there is a deglutative inhibition and the ileus starts to relax. You can see the color changes. Blue color indicates lower pressures and the red color indicates the higher pressures. So as soon as the patient starts to swallow, you can see the ileus relaxing. This is deglutative inhibition, which is absent in achalasia patients. And in between, you will see the esophageal motility. So now we'll go to the next slide. I will show you how to diagnose achalasia. Now the first picture, you will see that the lower horizontal line, it is a straight line. It is greenish in color. It is showing high pressures. And in the horizontal line, you can see the patient started to swallow. There is a break in the continuity, which indicates that the patient has swallowed. But ileus is high and there is no contractions. So you can see the next button, you can push, Dr. Kalla. So this is a type 1 achalasia where IRP is more than 15 and there is 100% absent peristalsis. The middle picture, it is showing again the lower esophageal sphincter, which is not relaxing at all even after the patient has swallowed. And you can see a straight line which is showing a pan-esophageal pressurization extending from upper esophageal sphincter to lower esophageal sphincter, which is a classical of type 2 achalasia. And then the third slide is showing a pattern of type 3 achalasia. Again, the IRP is high, but the contractions are spastic. And if you calculate the distal latency, it is low, it is less than 4.5. These are premature contractions. These are classical of type 3 achalasia. So we'll go to the next slide. So this is showing a correlation of manometry and barium studies. You can see type 1 achalasia. There is absent peristalsis of manometry and the grossly dilated esophagus. Type 2 achalasia, the esophagus is relatively narrow. The width of the esophagus is less as compared to type 1. And in type 3, you can see spastic contractions on barium, which are indicative of type 3 achalasia. We'll go to the next slide. And now this is important to do a manometry rather than, now we know that the manometry is the gold standard for diagnosis, but again, it has helped in typifying type 1, 2, and 3, which are predictors of the treatment response. These are the various studies, and you can see that the type 2 achalasia, it responds well. Whether you do a LHM, you do a balloon dilatation, or you do a POEM, or whatever you do to destroy the muscle, the lower esophageal sphincter, type 2 achalasia responds best, while type 3 achalasia response is least. And again, there are studies to prove that the POEM is obviously better in doing type 3 achalasia as compared to the other modalities. So with this, I hand over the slides to Dr. Kalla, who will guide you through the POEM procedure and the techniques of the procedure. Thank you.
Thank you, Pankaj, for an excellent talk, and you have elaborated how to make a diagnosis. This is very important for all clinicians to take the clinical history very well. That if any patient says that I am not able to swallow liquids as compared to solids, right? So solids will go inside, but liquids will not go inside the stomach when the esophagus is not contracting and you have a lower esophageal sphincter, which is very, very tight. So this diagnosis has to be made with the history only. So we have to be very vigilant in the history. So now to take us to achalasia treatment and how the new era is emerging where we are able to perform the whole surgical technique without the surgeons being there with the endoscopes. Now, Dr. Mukesh, kindly elaborate us.
Yeah, thank you, sir, and thank you so much. Ever since I have come back to Jaipur, and Dr. Rai is one enlightening person for the whole fraternity in our state of Rajasthan. And before I start about this discussion about achalasia cardia, there are a few thanksgiving also to be done, because those people who really helped us to be here today. And we started this program way back in 2018 September, when Dr. Mahdev came down to Jaipur for a live endoscopy workshop. So that was the situation. That was the time when Jaipur saw for the first time the first achalasia cardia being operated. And in the hall, there were people who were observing, and they were like aghast about, look, the mediastinum was there. So, and then subsequently, thanks to Dr. Vikas and Dr. Pankaj Desai, who have been my mentors in guiding me about small facts about where not to make mistakes and when to do and when not to do. So the treatment goals for achalasia cardia, as we all know, that whatever you may do, may it be a Heller's myectomy, balloon, or POEM, it's a palliative procedure. The basic intention of doing any therapeutic procedure on a patient of achalasia cardia is to give him a symptomatic relief and reduce the long-term risk for developing megaesophagus and stage achalasia, which requires esophagectomy. So we have multiple options, and over a period of time, in 2.5 decades of my career in GI, we have seen various stages of achalasia cardia, starting from pharmacological therapy, then came pneumatic dilatation, botulinum toxin. We Indians were not so fortunate to use it more frequently, barring the cost for botulinum toxin. And Heller's myectomy ever was a gold standard procedure for doing POEM procedure. Heller's is a good procedure, and tons of patients have got relief from achalasia cardia symptomatology. But then came a new procedure which was called POEM procedure. I'm really enlightened, happy to share with you that it was an Indian person for the first time who had this brilliant idea of opening a mucosa, entering inside the submucosa, and cutting out the muscle there, coming back 5 centimeters behind and closing the mucosa again. And he did this experiment on 4 pigs, and all 4 pigs survived. So taking this story forward, was the first person in 2008 in Japan who did this procedure for the first time. And since 2008, for last almost 12 years, we have multiple number of patients, and precise number I am not aware, but now we have many trials which support the use of POEM procedure routinely for achalasia cardia patients. So the so-called gold standard procedure for POEM procedure was Heller's myotomy. But we have enough data, and we have 4 big meta-analysis available now. We have 2 more now, which probably we forgot to place it here, which effectively says that POEM is as good as Heller's myotomy. The adverse effect profile is equivalent, and the operative time, pain or blood loss, and hospital stay are more or less similar in both the situations. But for the POEM, when we talk about this procedure, it is there are now paper from INOU's unit which says that now they're trying to make it as a daycare procedure. They've already sent a paper to GI endoscopy in 19 September, I presume, where they have published some 48 patients where the procedure was done in morning and patient was sent home in the evening. It's a scarless procedure. It doesn't cause much pain. And when you have finished the patient of POEM procedure, these patients would probably be in your recovery room as good as undergone any routine upper GI endoscopy. The big advantages is that we only cut circular muscles, the angle of ease is maintained, vagus is not disturbed. So much talked about GERD in reflux patient. So I think the researchers would have to address this issue by saying symptomatic GERD or GERD by pH studies. So if you go by pH studies, there is an incidence of GERD in POEM procedures. But for those patients, we have done more than 100 patients by now. And around 22, 23 patients, we have done pH study also. They are asymptomatic patients, but when you do pH study for these patients, few of them do get GERD-like symptoms in them. So when we compare it with LHM, length of myotomy in POEM can be as long as 14 centimeters, 15 centimeters also, which is to say that when surgeon is operating transhiatally, his maximum access is still carina, not above carina. So DES and type 3 is not their field anymore. It goes to POEM, people doing POEM. But for type 1 and type 2, where short myotomies are required, comparable short-term and long-term efficacy is as good as Heller's myotomy. Another 2 big advantages of doing POEM is redo POEM can be done. Even if you have a POEM failure in the first part, then you can do an anterior POEM because we've got 2 routes still. One is a posterior POEM and another is an anterior POEM. Now we have enough data to say that POEM is now a standard procedure, and maybe a time later we might call it a gold standard procedure as well. Now, when anybody intends to start a POEM procedure, these are the following equipments which will desperately be needed, without which POEM procedure cannot be done. I presume most of these equipments are available in all routine therapeutic endoscopy units, but I would invite your attention to the following things. You need a HD scope with an auxiliary water channel. You can do it without it also, but auxiliary water channel, if there is a bleeding in the tunnel while you are doing a dissection in the tunnel, if there is a bleed, then you have single channel, which requires accessory, so flushing becomes a problem. So if you have an auxiliary water channel, then you can use a foot pedal to push water and clear the field as while you are trying to do hemostasis. Then comes a transparent distal cap and CO2 insufflator and a controlled water flushing pump. When I talk about CO2 insufflator, then I have highlighted with bold letters saying with low flow connectors. If you go to Olympus, they provide you low flow connectors, but we have devised a method which I will share it with you down the line. Then comes triangular TTJ9, which is relatively less expensive equipment as compared to another knife, which is Arbe water jet. Arbe water jet has a great advantage. It shortens your time, but it's expensive equipment. When you come to generator, electrical generator, Cautery, the YO series is the best because all the protocols are already set into it. Even if today I am working on a Arbe YO3, if I want to go to some other center and do it, I can just carry my settings and just push it into another YO3 there, and I'll get the same settings again. You need an injector solution, which can be methylene blue, which is available in almost all the units. Then is a co-grasper. Anesthesia workstation is a must, and a varicose needle, which should be there to tackle any complication, which if in case happens. So this is how YO3 looks like. Now, what about the endoscopy Cautery settings? So these are few things which we need to understand. So the first step for doing a POEM procedure is to do a mucosal incision, which will require endocut and a force coag. So when you talk about effect 2 to 4, which probably would mean that while you're cutting, if you have more effect, it says that more coagulation will be done, less effect, less coagulation is done. So there can be small vessels into the mucosa which might bleed torrentially. So you can either use force coag or an endocut, and submucosal dissection can be done with force coag and spray coag as well. When you go to myotomy and doing a minor hemostasis, remember this thing, the spray coag is good enough, 30 to 50 watt is good. But if you ever encounter a bigger vessel, then you have to use a soft coag. Now the two important things which we need to appreciate here is what is force coag and what is a soft coag. Force coag is a mode of a cautery, herbe cautery, wherein you cause coagulation, but the depth of coagulation is less. When you use a soft coag mode with a setting of effect 5, which would mean that coagulation will be more and the coagulation will be quite deep. Therefore, to say that if you encounter a big vessel, use soft coag. If you encounter a small minor vessel, then you can use a force coag. So these are few other accessories. I would request your attention here. This is a standard Olympus cap, distal hood we call it. Fuji came out with a wonderful idea. Sometimes entering inside a tunnel becomes a problem. So what they did, they made it a taper tip. So the entry becomes quite easy with the Fuji taper tip as compared to the Olympus tip. But while you are dissecting, the area of field which is visible to you is compromised with the Fuji taper hood. But of course, with passing time, you will probably okay doing it with any cap, but whatever is available to you. Co-grasper, remember one thing, in co-grasper, we have three types of co-graspers, at least a small one and a large one we should have in a unit before you start doing a POEM procedure. Hemoclips, you can have multiple hemoclips. The expensive hemoclips come from Wilson Cook and Microvasive. And the inexpensive one, just for 500 rupees, is the standard hemoclip which we have from Olympus. Now, there are multiple type of knives which are available, but today we are talking only about POEM. So those people who have I mean, if your patient is rich, you can use a water jet, but TTJ works very well. Now, this is a kind of short cap, which is attached to the tip of the forward viewing scope. The big advantage of using a cap in front of the endoscope is that this cap keeps on stretching the area of the submucosal area, through which when your accessory goes in, the dissection becomes quite easy. So what about using a TTJ knife or a Arbe hybrid knife? I have seen even in my earlier days when we were planning doing a POEM procedure, we used to think that, look, I don't have a Arbe jet and I can't afford a Arbe jet because it is another 25 lakhs of expense. So I really want to tell you that we have data to say that, using a Arbe knife or TT knife doesn't really make a big difference. Operation time, little longer in TTJ as compared to a hybrid knife, and bleeding rates are little more in TTJ knife, but over a period of time, with good accessory and 300C cautery, all kind of these things can be managed. The advantage of using a hybrid knife that it injects and it cuts at the same time. So that is one big advantage, and it has a pressure pump through which adequate insufflation can be done in the submucosa. I seek your attention to this particular video. You will appreciate that while you're doing a POEM procedure, insufflation rate of carbon dioxide shouldn't be very high. A routine CO2 insufflation will push around 8 to 10 liters of CO2 per minute. But with that amount of insufflation, the patient will get very high EtCO2 and complications because of that. So what we are doing here, the connection with the CO2 insufflator has a screw. So if you start derotating and loosening the screw, the flow of CO2 will reduce, and this is the easiest way of reducing the flow, and it is a predictable way of reducing the flow as well, because when you do this at that time, the flow will stay the same throughout your procedure. Now, having done this, what are the pre-procedure requirements? Patient should stay having undergone one upper GI endoscopy and a proper assessment of the procedure. Keep him NBM for 24 hours or give him sips of hot water, because we have realized that sips of hot water clears the mucosa very well. Empirical antifungal, 1 antibiotic on day of admission. Then do an initial endoscopy, clear suction, food residue in stomach, and assess mucosa. Assessing mucosa is the most important point in taking up a patient for achalasia cardia, because mucosa is our barrier. Mucosa is our savior. So if anything goes wrong with mucosa, in that case, we will face problems of complications of POEM procedure. Now, while your patient is on your table, please get your HRM again in front of you. Make sure that you're dealing with what kind of type of achalasia. Assess barium swallow. Control of CO2 flow. Make sure that air is off. Make sure that air is off. On any Olympus equipment, there is a button. You have to make it standby and make sure that the air which is going inside patient's body is CO2. If you do this mistake, then it is a disaster. And while you start the procedure, have a look on the anesthesia workstation and keep in your mind what were the basal blood pressure, pulse, peak airway pressure, and EtCO2 level of this patient, and mucosal details. Then assess the location of gastroesophageal junction, tertiary contractions, and then start planning about your entry point. So when you start assessing your entry point, how to assess the entry point? The assessment of entry point, that you have to assess the GE junction, and then you have to come back and see, depending on the type of achalasia. If you have like type 3 achalasia, you have to have at least 14 to 15 centimeters long myotomy. So your entry point should be at least 15 centimeters from GE junction. If you're dealing with a type 1 or type 2 achalasia, in that particular situation, you can just come 10 to 12 centimeters beyond proximal to the GE junction, so as to say that this is the GE junction and this is the entry point. So this distance in type 1 or 2 can be as okay if to have 12 centimeters, because when you have 12 centimeters of tunneling, 2 centimeters inside the gastric site, which makes it 14 centimeters, 5 centimeters, beyond 5 centimeters from the entry point, you will start doing a myotomy. This is the point of myotomy, this is the point of entry point. This should be at least 5 centimeters away. So in type 1 or type 2, by doing this, you will be making a myotomy of maybe around 7 to 8 centimeters. So this is how you are going to assess the entry point. Then you're going to do the tunneling. After doing tunneling, you're going to do a myotomy. After doing a myotomy, you're going to make depends on every person. Somebody would probably do a circular myotomy, and somebody would do a full thickness myotomy. We have adequate research papers, which I will share with you. Having done this, you come back and close the entry point. Now, mucosal incision. Before doing a mucosal incision, having decided your entry point, you have to really assess the mucosal details. Because if you fail to assess mucosal details properly, you're sure to end up with a problem. So make sure that your mucosa is healthy before you initiate a process for POEM procedure. Now we have a wonderful study which has come from China, wherein you have 6 types of mucosa, which I am sure you're able to see. The ABC mucosa is okay, but D, E, F mucosa are bad. So if you have a patient who has a D, E, or F kind of a mucosa, then you have to treat the mucosa. This stasis esophagitis and stasis problem with the mucosa has to be treated. There have been situations in our experience where we have placed these patients on a nasojejunal tube for almost 2 weeks to downstage the mucosal changes from D back to B or C or A at least. The A is ideal, of course. So if you get an A type, this kind of a clear mucosa, then the probability of getting a loose kind of a submucosa is like this. But if you going to get a D kind of a mucosa, then you're going to push in saline inside the submucosa, and the submucosa would just not lift. So this will increase your complications. So when you correlate this, you will appreciate that the success rate, if you see success rate, this drops down to just 28.57% in patients who have grade D mucosa. So if I go back to this slide, so if you have this kind of a mucosa, your ability to do a POEM procedure successfully drops down to 30%. But if you get a mucosa like A, your ability to do a POEM procedure successfully will be as good as 99.7%. So when we go ahead, then there are certain more correlations of these mucosal changes. If more the age, bad will be the mucosal grades. More the duration of disease, bad will be the grades of mucosa. And the lumen morphology also correlates with the mucosal changes. So for those patients who have tortuous esophagus, these mucosa will be D kind of a mucosa. For those patients who have a D kind of a mucosa, they have a very bad submucosal fibrosis, and you will not be able to lift, and your procedure might get into problem. Now, mucosal incision. So when you are doing a mucosal incision, the first thing you do, you take a needle, which can be a 22 gauge needle from a routine in a sclerotherapy injection needle. But I normally like to use a needle from Olympus because the beveled edge is very nice and sharp in there. You just push it in bluntly and start withdrawing it. And your assistant keeps on pushing methylene blue. And when he's pushing, the moment you're into submucosa, there will be a wheal formation, with a bleb formation there. So this bleb formation, adequate bleb formation should be done. So when you take an adequate bleb formation, then this kind of a bleb formation will happen. So the amount of saline which is needed for this kind of a bleb formation depends, but normally we use 15 to 20 cc of methylene blue. One more customization we have done over a period of time is in 200 cc of water, we place 1 ampule of adrenaline because there are small vessels here. So when you cut these vessels, there is a bleeding. And when there is a bleeding, and when you try to tackle these bleedings, what happens that the water which you have injected into the submucosa gets dissipated. Your entry point gets into problem and the difficulties arise. So now to decide that entry POEM and posterior POEM are two kinds of procedures. You can take your incision point for posterior POEM. So how to decide that which is the best? If your patient is in supine position, this is the spinal impression you can see, and you flush water. So wherever the water stays is the posterior part. So this is the ideal situation. Just try and find out which area you have to do injection. Try to avoid big vessels if they are there. Now, this small about anterior versus posterior POEM, largely speaking, we have 4 RCTs on this issue, which doesn't really make any difference to the outcome of the patient. If you do an anterior POEM, shorter length of hospitalization, the posterior has a less side effects. You need more experience in doing anterior POEM. Probably after maybe 100 patients, you can attempt doing an anterior POEM. But in my personal experience, we should preserve or we should reserve anterior POEM for a situation where posterior POEM has failed, or we should also try and do anterior POEM for those patients who are failure of other procedures done earlier. Otherwise, doing either anterior POEM or posterior POEM, more or less, it doesn't make any difference. We have 4 RCTs which had 488 patients. Reasonable, nice comparison was made, so as to say that anterior and posterior doesn't make a difference to the outcome of the patient. Now, when you're going to make an incision, then there are 4 things which we need to remember. Incision technique. So what you do, you take out TTG knife, select an area which has low vascularity, and using a force quag, you make a jab inside this wheel. Once you have made a jab, then after this, either you can cut from above to down, like we all do sphincterotomies. I mean, there are people who love doing sphincterotomies from above to down, saying that it is more predictable and the control is good. There are people who would say that above down and down above doesn't matter. And making a mucosal incision point for achalasia cardia, the important thing here is that whichever way you are comfortable, you should do that. First make a jab, clear an opening, then either cut below or you go above. So what I personally do, I go proximal to distal. The technique which I use here is, I use force quag, I lift it up and then I do endocut. So you have coagulated the superficial vessels, and endocut gives you low coagulation so that there is not too much of charring there. One important thing here is that muscularis mucosae, we need to remember that muscularis mucosae is a culprit which doesn't allow our entrance inside the tunnel. I am sure that all those people who are listening to this talk would probably appreciate that when we started doing ERCPs, The whole struggle was entering inside the inside the bile duct. Once inside the bile duct, there wasn't any big problem. Believe my words, even when you're doing POEM procedure, the whole struggle is at this level only. If you have made a clean cut on the mucosa and you've entered inside the submucosal tunnel, most of the problems are resolved. Therefore, the entrance has to be done very carefully. Select an area with low vascularity. You cut it open, and then and after cutting it open, then you will find an area. If you see this video here, so this is one patient. We did it in our beginning days. First, you take a needle, push in a needle, and when you're pushing a needle and you're injecting, just try to pull this needle back. Gradually, you pull this needle back. The moment the needle is going to be in the submucosa, there will be a wheal formation and a bleb formation here. Once the bleb formation, we are withdrawing the needle, and this is nice bleb formation. Like when you're doing a esophageal bending, we all say then when there is a readout, just fire the band. Similarly, it should be enough to obliterate your screen. So much of bleb formation should be there. Now, after doing this, what I do, I insert the TTG knife inside the submucosa. Then I use forced quack on small burst, and then endocut to bring it out. So you will appreciate that there is not too much of charring. If you use endocut, then there will be no charring, but there will be a minimal increased risk of bleeding will be there. Having done this, then you have to do ledging. So this ledging is something wherein what you're doing, you're trying to cut the muscularis mucosae. The D grade mucosa, as we were discussing earlier, have a very tough muscularis mucosae which doesn't allow you to enter inside your submucosa at all. So adequate dissection of submucosal muscularis mucosae is very important. And believe my words that if you have done adequate ledging, which means that you have cut open the muscularis mucosae, then entering inside the submucosal tunnel is very easy. When you're trying to enter inside the submucosal tunnel, there are two good methods of doing it. Either you remove the submucosa, come towards the proximal end of your mucosal entry point, make your knob down and just push it, you will be inside the tunnel. If you find any difficulty, then you rotate the scope, bring your mucosal incision on the entry wall and your hood, the cap, fix the cap at the distal part of the mucosal incision and push, and you will find yourself into the submucosa. If you do this step very carefully and if you enter inside the submucosal tunnel, then 50% of your problems of doing POEM procedure is over. So I come back to this. The longitudinal incision should be around 2 centimeters in length. Areolar tissue of submucosa is divided until circular muscle fibers are identified, which allows your entry inside the tunnel very easy. Once inside the space, the muscle is oriented on the right side and mucosa on the left side. Now, this point is of great relevance. It is not necessary that you keep muscle on the right side and mucosa on the left side. It is your personal choice. What I personally do, the moment I am inside the tunnel, I will do an intentional marking on the muscle. I'll burn the muscle a bit. And when I do it, then I know that my muscle is here, and then I have to go along the plane of the muscle and I have to avoid the mucosa because mucosa is your savior. Now, parallel endoscopic myotomy, they said that you can do transverse incision for entry point and you can do a horizontal incision also. It doesn't really matter. The transverse was a difficult thing to close. Therefore, now the standard practice is to do longitudinal incision only. Now, having done this, you have entered inside the tunnel. Then what should be the length of the tunnel? Now, the length of the tunnel depends, as I have discussed earlier. Now, if it is a type 3 achalasia, it's a spastic, it's a jackhammer esophagus, then you have to make at least 15 to 16 centimeters long tunnel because you reduce 3 to 4 centimeters safety margin for myotomy. So you do good 10 to 12 centimeters of myotomy. So which means that 15 centimeters on the GE side and on the esophageal side and 2 centimeters on the gastric side, which makes your tunneling at least 17 centimeters long. Now, stay careful about the mucosa. Mucosa is your savior. So I would probably re-emphasize again here, your CO2 insufflation has to be proper, number one. Number two, entry point should be as quick as possible. If your entry point is entering inside the submucosa is quick, then half of your problems are over. And if you can save your mucosa, then probably in doing POEM procedure, no big problem will ever come. Now, once inside the submucosal space and oriented, the areolar tissue is divided just above the muscle layer. Small vessels may be cauterized with endosurgical knife. Larger vessels will probably require a co-grasper forceps. Tunnel should be wide enough. Now, if I try to highlight these 3 points, then remember 3 important things. Once 2 centimeters inside the submucosal tunnel, start using spray mode. Spray is a non-contact mode. Forced coag or soft coag is a, or an endocut also is a contact mode, which means that while you are using a spray, you have to stay away 1 to 2 millimeters away from the mucosa. And when you press your button, the nice submucosal dissection happens. But probably what happens that spray causes more collateral injury to the mucosa. So you have to be very careful. After a couple of cases you have done, probably I am sure that everybody will start using spray mode for the dissection into the submucosal tunnel. If you see YouTube videos of Inoue, he always uses spray mode. And if you see YouTube videos of other senior people, there are few people who use forced coag. So ultimately, once having done few procedures, it ends up as a personal choice. Now, at least 1/3 circumference has to be cleared. Why this is important? Because your entry of the scope inside the tunnel and your retrieval should be easy. If you do this, then adequate myotomy can be done and you can control your movement. There is one important thing here also. If you do good submucosal tunneling, and if for any chance your myotomy is not adequate, there are studies to suggest, the diffuse DI studies, which say that patient will get almost 60% relief in their symptoms, which doesn't mean to say that you don't do a myotomy. But what I want to emphasize, and I personally feel also that when a surgeon is doing a Heller's myotomy from a transhiatal approach, what he is doing, he is clearing the hiatus, then he is dissecting the muscle, then he is looking at the mucosa. The moment he looks at the mucosa as a glistening white thing, the moment you've seen that, then he thinks that the procedure is over, then he makes a wrap and he comes out. Now, where does the submucosal dissection go? The POEM has a big advantage, low recurrence rate as compared to LHM. In our 100 patients, out of those 100 patients, there are like 14 to 15 patients we did, which were like LHM failures. What we realized in these patients, the tunneling wasn't a problem because surgeons probably never touch a submucosal area. And what we do, we are doing a great submucosal tunneling. What we are doing, we are almost cleaning tunnel up to 1/3, which makes a great decrease in IRP for these patients and lasting relief for these patients. Now, small vessels cauterized with simple, your TTJ knife, you take your TTJ knife close to that. If you're using spray, fire spray, then it will get coagulated. But remember, if you have a big vessel, then you ask your assistant to change your mode to soft coag and 80-watt setting with the effect of 4. Effect of 4 would mean that there will be more charring, more coagulation. 80-watt would mean that the energy delivered will be more, so that you're 100% sure that the vessel is coagulated. The third biggest enemy or a dreaded thing for doing a POEM procedure is leaving a vessel unattended. Because if that vessel bleeds, then you are in for a serious problem. Now, how do you confirm that your tunnel is complete? So you keep dissecting along the side of the muscle and keep going inside. You have created a mark outside on your scope, which is the mark of GE junction. The moment you cross that junction, which means that you have come inside the gastric side of the tunnel. Now, what happens that if your dissection was inappropriate and if you try to push your scope hard enough, the scope buckles. When the scope buckles, you are not into the gastric side, but still the external mark which you have placed would probably say that you have crossed the GE junction, which is not right. And this is the biggest problem for failure. So the important thing again in this POEM procedure is that you have to ensure that you have crossed the GE junction and then you have dissected 2 centimeters inside the gastric side as well. So now how do you know that you are into the gastric side? Resistance to your scope will go away. Wider submucosal space will appear. You will find large perforating vessels and you will find palisading sperm-like vessels there, which would suggest that probably you are at the GE side, you have approached the GE side of the tunnel. These spindle-like veins also support. So when you see the pictures, so if you find palisading vessels like this, probably you are on the gastric side. When you find sperm-like spindle-like vessels here, then you are probably on the gastric side. If you find big perforating vessels beyond these palisading or spindle-shaped vessels, that is the end point of your tunneling. So now how do you ensure that you have done an adequate job? You come out of the tunnel, go through the GE junction, and you will realize, having not done the myotomy, having only done a submucosal tunnel, 60% of the stress at the LES is gone, which is to say that tunneling is the most important, and tunneling is the area which probably differentiates us from the surgeons. And I am sure down the line, when we have more data, then this is the tunneling which will make us better than Heller's myotomy. So you come back, you retrovert your scope, and this is what you must see: blanched gastric mucosa of your impression of your submucosal tunnel. If you find this from GE junction, you are 2-3 centimeters inside, which would probably predict 100% of the success of your procedure. Therefore, to say, may I repeat it again, if you find spindle vessels, if your retroversion into the gastric side shows that there is adequate blanching, your tunneling is well done. Now, this is a short video of how the submucosal dissection is done. Now, in this particular method, we are using a force quack. So you will appreciate that when you're using a force quack, you have to stay in touch with the submucosa. Right now, what we have done, we have kept the muscle on the right side and we have kept the mucosa on the left side. So we keep ourselves on the right side of the screen and we keep dissecting so as to make sure that we are on the towards the muscle side only. Now, having done this, then comes the time for doing a myotomy. So when you're doing a myotomy, now there are certain theoretical questions which we need to answer. Selective myotomy of the inner circular muscle is started 6 centimeters above GE junction and extends 2-3 centimeters below GE junction. This particular thing, 8 centimeter or 9 centimeter myotomy holds true for patients of type 1 to type 2. For those patients who have type 3, who have significant peristaltic vessels, for those patients, your myotomy has to be longer in the esophageal side, at least 10 to 12 centimeters in the esophageal side. Therefore, to say that you need a bigger tunnel in type 3. In jackhammer esophagus, we need to visit the literature. The literature says that you need to go across the GE. There are few papers who says that in jackhammer esophagus need not to cross GE at all. Just do a myotomy into the esophageal side. For 3 jackhammer patients we went across it. Patient had a dramatic good relief. Now selecting a selective myotomy, like leaving the longitudinal fibers alone, will be time consuming, and we have a paper which says that either you do a full thickness or you have do a circular muscle myotomy alone, the results are more or less the same. Therefore, to say that don't waste your time in dissecting between circular and longitudinal muscle, you do a complete myotomy and the patients will do good relief. Now, for 3-4 times I said the length of myotomy. Now we have a wonderful paper, peroral endoscopic short versus long myotomy for treatment of achalasia. Short myotomy they have labeled as less than 7 centimeters, long myotomy is more than 7 centimeters. So if you go to LES pressure, you will appreciate that before and after POEM, it was insignificant p-values, whether you have done a long myotomy or short myotomy, particularly in type 1 or type 2. In type 3, of course, as I said, you need a longer one. So length of myotomy is a customization in patients of DES and jackhammer esophagus. So the big question here, one more important thing which we must realize, that when you are treating a DES or jackhammer esophagus, where should be your mucosal entry point? You have to patiently wait into the esophageal lumen, keep coming out, and the most proximal tight contraction which you are able to appreciate, you start your entry point a centimeter proximal to that, which would probably mean that these patients have a significant symptom other than dysphagia is pain. Unless you cut these muscles, his pain will not go away. Therefore, an entry point into spastic esophagus or type 3 or jackhammer esophagus, it should be 1 centimeter proximal to the most proximal tertiary contraction in the esophagus which you encounter. So that is the most important thing. Now, selective myotomy is like this, and you have cut open the circular fibers and longitudinal fibers you can still visualize. Somebody might be wondering that what if you cut the whole one? Doesn't really matter as long as situation is under control and there is no capnomediastinum and no capnoperitoneum. Here the important thing is that when you start doing your myotomy, keep your eye on the anesthesia monitor, which should always keep your EtCO2 less than 40. Between 35 to 40 is okay. For example, Dr. Alok will enlighten us more on what is the importance of EtCO2. But if your EtCO2 goes above 40, it is better to wait for some time, let it come down. Otherwise, wherever you will touch, you will bleed. And wherever even the innocuous looking small vessels will start spurting very well, patient will have a reactionary hypertension also. Now, this is how you start doing a myotomy. So when you do a myotomy, what I do, you take your knob, just jab it inside the muscle, quack, 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 and cut. While you are cutting, pull it back so that the TTJ knife will not bounce and go and hit on the mucosa, which is the roof of this tunnel. So if you appreciate what we initiated myotomy incision here, and after doing this myotomy incision, we again go inside the distal part of it and quack, 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 go inside, lift it a bit with your knob and use endocut to cut. When you use quack, 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 then you have coagulated, and when you come back, please pull it back so that it doesn't go and fire on the mucosa and cause injury. Now, what are the potential sites of bleeding during peroral endoscopic myotomy? If you see vessels like this along the side wall of mucosal tunnel, there is not a serious issue. But if you see vessels like this is considered as a larger vessel. You need to take a co-grasper. And remember, while you are using a co-grasper, go towards the muscle, hold this 80 watt effect 4 soft quack, and just stand on the pedal till the whole vessel becomes white. Once this becomes white, use endocut to cut it. There will be a safety margin. But branching network of vessels at the cutting edge of these are liable to bleed. So be careful about these vessels. Having done your myotomy, wait for some time, look at it and come out, because this is your last chance to enter into that area. If there is any mistake about not maintaining the hemostasis, then there will be a problem. Now, if you see bleeding from the mucosal incision site, now this is a very serious problem. I consider it more serious than other places because in your effort to coagulate this bleeding vessel at the entry point, if you lose time, the fluid, methylene fluid which you have injected gets dissipated and your entry point becomes more, and you struggle a lot to enter inside the submucosal tunnel. So as far as possible, use quack, quack, quack and endocut. Avoid large vessels. Use Adaline into your solution so that small vessels will not bleed. And make sure that the muscularis mucosae, this is the white area which my arrow is showing, is the muscularis mucosae. At least cut it open adequately, which permits your entry inside the submucosal tunnel. These are spurting vessels on the gastric side. They are nightmare things. So as you approach the gastric side, slow down your speed. Be careful while observing things. Keep your EtCO2 levels low, and make sure that every vessel is seen before managing it. Now, the other spastic disorders of the esophagus is DES, jackhammer esophagus. We can use myotomy. We need longer myotomy. If you can do POEM for these procedures, and you appreciate that Eckhart score has dropped down significantly in diffuse esophageal spasm, jackhammer is the best to do for these patients. You get the best response. Now, peroral endoscopic myotomy POEM procedure versus LHM in treatment of type 3 achalasia. This is now proven, and now we very strongly say that at least for type 3 achalasia, POEM is a gold standard procedure, not Heller's myotomy. Now, closure of the mucosal incision. So closure of the mucosal incision starts from the distal end, the gastric side end first. centimeter, few millimeters away from your cut margin, place a clip which will bring both the cut ridges in line, and keep placing clips and ensure that there is a proper apposition of the mucosae. Now what happens that if your first clip is not done properly, then your apposition becomes like this. If your apposition becomes like this, then there will be a problem with healing. Make sure that the apposition should be like this. The apposition should be absolutely like this. If the apposition is like this, then there will be a dehiscence of the entry point, and these patients will bother you a lot later on. Now, there are small tricks about placing clips. While you are taking your clip inside, this is the last clip we are placing. Other clips are there. If you have a standing clip, which means your clip is played properly, both the arms of the clip should be in your vision while you are placing a clip, then your clip will be okay. Both the cut margins should be equidistant from the arms of the clip, then your placement of the clip will be good, and your clip should stand. If your clip stands, which means that you have done adequate entry point closure for these patients. So if you think your clips are there, then there is no problem. Now comes to the most dreaded part of the subject, which is the complications. We can avoid some and we have to face some. So adverse events can be pre-procedure, like patient has aspiration pneumonia, better don't do. It is an elective procedure. Please make sure that patient is okay before you take him on your table. Make sure that you bring the grades of the mucosa down before you take the procedure. It is an elective procedure. Patient is suffering from this disease for quite some time. He might as well bear it for some more time rather than inviting complications. Intra-procedural problems can be insufflation related. It can be mucosal injuries. It can be bleed. Mucosal injuries can be avoided. There will be few mucosal injuries which will happen in the earlier part of your learning curve, but you can easily manage them, which is not a big deal. Insufflation related is careless mistake. You have to be very careful. You have to control the CO2 insufflation, because this is something which you can always avoid. Bleeding, if you're careful, the patient will not bleed. Then delayed bleeding. This is the problem if your hemostasis is inadequate during the procedure. Mucosal barrier failure. Now, mucosal barrier failure is a serious problem in almost 6 to 7 of our patients we did. And when we did a gastrography study, there was a contrast extravasation into the submucosal tunnel, because probably our clips went bad. For these patients, we had to keep them NBM for almost 3 to 4 days. And after that, we did a gastrography study. This extravasation was not there. And then we allowed them liquids. There were 2 patients in whom the extravasation was still persisting. So we had to place them on a nasojejunal tube and feed them for almost 2 weeks before doing a gastrography study again. After that, they recovered. Except for these 7 patients, we never ever had any problem. Now, hemodynamic instability is usually due to EtCO2. Premature termination of procedure is probably either there is an anatomical problem or mucosal details were not adequately addressed in the beginning of the procedure. So if there is an intraoperative delayed bleeding, then these are the problems. Mucosal injury, this is one subject we will talk a bit in 2-3 slides now. Post-procedure leak, if at all it happens, then it requires nasojejunal feeding for some time. Usually these patients will recover. Now for those patients, those of my colleagues who really want to start doing this POEM procedure, if you see, there is a procedure called O-POEM. If you go to GI endoscopy, there are 78 patients who published series of O-POEM, wherein the operator, without making a submucosal tunnel, he did a through and through dissection of the mucosa and the muscle, placed a nasojejunal tube, kept it for some time, and patient recovered. Which is to say that you have to take your first step and you'll be able to do POEM procedure easily. Won't be any big problem. The minor problem of these complications will be insufflation related mucosal injuries. So after doing this procedure, you have to go back into the stomach, deflate your stomach. If your stomach is bloated, or if your anesthetist tells you that EtCO2 is high and mean airway pressure is high, and if there is a leak inside the peritoneum of CO2, capnoperitoneum, then you use your varicose needle, you push it in, deflate the patient, just absolutely don't worry. On the contrary, if in case your patient has a capnoperitoneum, you're sure you cross the G junction and patient is definitely going to benefit, which doesn't mean that it is a blessing in disguise. You try to avoid it, but even if it happens, there is no need to panic because this is one small problem which is easily manageable. Now, this is how you deflate your stomach in case if patient develops a capnoperitoneum. Now, these are dreaded pictures. Thanks to Dr. Zahir, who published this article where you can get a capnoperitoneum, you get gas under diaphragm, you get a capnomediastinum and a big pneumothorax here. So these are dreaded things which probably rarely will happen, and you need to tackle them as and when these such kind of problems will come up. Now, this is something which we need to be careful. Mucosal injuries are mechanical injury. You are bluntly, your scope is injuring them with endoscope shaft, or your thermal injury. So we in GI endoscopy 2019, we have a very nice article which says that you have two types of injuries. The type 2 are difficult to injuries. Type 2 are difficult to repair. Type 1 are easy to repair. There can be, you can just have a small hematoma. You need not bother. There can be a small thermal injury. You can just place a clip here. There are situations, bad situations like this. Then you have to have bigger clips to manage this. Or sometimes you have to keep these patients on NG feeding if this kind of a problem ever comes up. Now, potential factors for mucosal injuries are that your selection of patient was not good. The mucosa was unhealthy. There was excessive submucosal fibrosis and you were not able to dissect. And there are situations that there was a diverticula on the way and probably we ignored it or we missed it. Or if we are doing it, then you need to be more careful because encounter mucosal injuries into such situations. Now, post-procedure, on what we normally do on 36 hours after the procedure, we do a gastrography study. If there is no interluminal leak or there is no extravasation of contrast, which would mean that your procedure is perfect. If there is an easy movement of fluid across G, procedure is successful. Then keep these patients on liquid diet for 24 to 48 hours, 4-5 days. I'd keep them for 7 days to be sure that we don't bother patient too much. From second week onwards, he goes to your soft diet and discharge on proton pump inhibitors. And this kind of follow-up we can keep, like for 6 weeks, you meet him again for first time, keep him on PPIs and encourage them to undergo a pH testing and pH manometry at the end of 6 months if possible, and one follow-up at 12 months. So do a time barium swallow and make sure that your procedure is enduring and successful. So if you do a procedure 4 weeks later, this is what you find. All the clips have gone away. The injury, the mucosal entry point is now no more there. It is absolutely cleanly healed one. The beaking which was there prior to it, you have a wide LES now. Now this is pre-POEM and this is post-POEM procedure immediately. Good adequate opening of LES. So now I would probably, angel in my team is Dr. Alok Verma, because without him, it is a serious issue managing these achalasia cardia patients, because he's the guy who's been with me for almost like more than 100 patients. He's probably not holding the score, but he knows what he's going to expect. So he guides me about the do's and don'ts of the procedure. And he also tells me when to go in and when to stop. So Alok, Dr. Rai sir will probably introduce Alok before he starts.
Wonderful talk, Dr. Mukesh. It speaks how conscious you are in taking care of the patient. You are expecting and you are manipulating everything which can harm the patient in the benefit of the patient. And I believe the first and foremost thing for a physician, endoscopist, should be the patient. How you can avoid all those complications which are there with your meticulous thinking process. And he has elaborately talked about where one can go wrong and how to avoid all those things. Thank you, Mukesh, for giving an excellent talk. And as you talked about, Angel in the team is anesthetist. This the reason is that you are focusing on the patient's procedure, and he is taking care of the patient as a whole. And he is, as you rightly mentioned, he has understood the whole process so well that he can guide you. stop yourself, you do this thing, you do this thing. And he is a very analytic person. I'll say, and Alok, when he's there in the procedure room, you need not bother about the patient. He will take care of all the aspects, and even he will guide you. And I would now say that he's a anesthetist with a endoscopic vision, and he can talk to us on how best one patient should be taken care of. Dr. Alok, you are a real angel in the team, and we'll welcome you and your comments on this
Thank you, sir.
procedure.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everybody, and special thanks to Dr. Rai, Dr. Mukesh, and Dr. Pankaj for inviting me to this webinar on POEM. So we'll be talking about the anesthesia concerns in POEM procedure. The first thing is that we should take care of the patient is the pre-anesthetic checkup. We should admit the patient a day prior and do all the PAC investigations and the relevant investigations and grade the patient accordingly to the risk of ASA. ASA is the American Society of Anesthesiologists grading. That is the physical grading, and which is helpful in risk taking ability of the anesthesia. I mean, in this procedure of POEM, grade 1 and grade 2 patient should be taken, and grade 3 and grade 4 and grade 5 should be avoided. That is, the high risk patient should be avoided in this case. And the anticipated difficult intubation such as Mallampati grading, mouth opening should be observed. In cases of difficult intubation like the ankylosing spondylitis and limited mouth opening and prominent tooth, we should take care of these things. And in case of very limited opening, we should do awake intubation with the help of video bronchoscope. Other thing we should look about is the comorbidity. That is, I mean, the patient is having hypertension and diabetes and other comorbidities should be taken care of, and the references should be done a day prior. And we should grade the patient accordingly to the disease. And the other part of this procedure is the consenting, which is very important. We should take the procedure consent, anesthesia consent, and the alternative to these procedure, alternative to POEM procedure also, we should also explain. And the next step, we should do the pre-medicate the patient a day before and in the night of anxiolysis, and he should get his routine medicines like antihypertensive and anti-diabetic medicines. We should be given and controlled the diabetes also, and all these hypertension should be controlled prior to the procedure. Otherwise, there are risks involved in this. And a night prior, we should start the IV line. The patient can be dehydrated because limited intake of the fluids. We should start an IV line night before. Next slide, sir. Next slide. Yeah. So we do all these patients in our anesthesia in GI suite only. These are the anesthesia equipment available in the first slides, and in the second slide, this is the anesthesia workstation with multi-para monitors and all these ETCO2 monitoring, as well as ventilatory monitoring, as well as the ETCO2 and peak airway pressure should be monitored in these machines. And there are two vaporizers, sevoflurane and isoflurane are there for the inhalational anesthetics. Next slide, sir. So while we take the patient on the next day morning, we should re-evaluate the patient, the consent part and the NPO status. These are vitals, and consenting should be again checked. Now, the positioning in the anesthesia suite is there. You can look at the patient. Patient is in the supine position. Dr. Kala is on the, the endoscopist should be on the left side, and on the right side, there is an anesthesia machine, and the gagger is on the head end. and the IV line should be on the anesthesia side only. Next slide, sir. Yeah, the main concern of this POEM procedure is the monitoring itself. We should do standard monitoring of ASA monitoring. I mean, that is the heart rate, ECG, NIBP, saturation, temperature, respiratory rate, and end tidal carbon dioxide concentration, and peak airway pressures, and anesthesia gas monitoring. You can look at the figure. The 16 is that of the peak airway pressure. The mean is 7, and this is the minute volume. 5.6 liter per minute is the minute volume. In 1 minute, how we, the volume of air given, and 32 CO mm of Hg is the end tidal carbon dioxide. This is capnogram. This squared and latent. This is the capnogram. So we should be very cautious about these two. 16, that is the peak airway pressure, and 32, that is the end tidal CO2 of the patient. So we can start with the induction of the procedure. While inducing the patient, general anesthesia is given with the placement of endotracheal tube. So while induction the patient, we should look at the rapid sequence induction with required pressures, so that we can avoid the patient from aspiration. So a day prior to the this procedure, we can empty the esophagus, or we can insert an RT, or while on the same day, we can empty itself by the endoscope also. So we should be very careful about the induction. That is, we can aspirate the patient can aspirate. We should take care of it. Now the next step is the maintenance of anesthesia. In the maintenance of anesthesia, we use inhalational agents and muscle relaxants, and we monitor end tidal CO2 and peak airway pressures, and we inform any rise in end tidal and CO2 to the operator, so that if the levels are very high, we can stop the procedure, and we can look for pneumoperitoneum, pneumomediastinum, pneumothorax, and surgical emphysema. We should be very cautious, and the patient drapes are such that we should expose the patient of the drapes from the abdomen and the neck part, so that we can observe that, watch for pneumo. Now the next thing is that there is extubation of patient is very, very important. Patient can aspirate any moment while extubation. A fully awake patient should be extubated. And when there is end tidal CO2 is very high, a patient cannot be extubated, and patient should be electively ventilated till all the vitals and parameters are normal. Then only can the patient can be extubated. Next slide, sir. What are the alarms of anesthesia? There is sudden rise in peak airway pressures and end tidal CO2. When there is sudden rise, there is capnothorax can be prediction, and capnoperitoneum and surgical emphysema can be there. We should look for it. So when there is very high, when the peak airway pressure is more than 35 and rising end tidal of more than 45, the patient can be hemodynamically unstable. So at that point in time, we should stop the procedure, hyperventilate the patient, decompress the pneumo, and with the help of IV cannula, and when there is small capnoperitoneum, capnothorax, we can continue the procedure. When the patient is hemodynamically unstable, we should definitely decompress. And while we can restart the procedure when everything is normal. So that is the anesthesia part. Special care is of aspiration and the complication arising due to the insufflation of CO2. And we are now insufflating at very low CO2 levels. From the learning curve, we have done all these complications, but now, with God Almighty, last 10 cases, we have no complication at all. Thanks, sir. Thank you for watching.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, sir.
Alok, for excellent presentation as to how patient has to be looked up and how we should go ahead. I must congratulate all the three speakers, Dr. Pankaj, Dr. Mukesh, for a very, very clear presentation as to how we should go about in this patient. Very clearly, you have, Dr. Alok, Dr. Mukesh, you have talked about that what should be done for these complication avoidance and other things. But there are many questions from our viewers. The first and foremost is for all of you, and especially for you, for a very clear, a very apt presentation in which you have talked about real-time procedural defects which can, procedural complications, avoidance can be done, how the procedure should be done. They all have been congratulating you for this. But there are many questions which have popped up, and it's very important that we should clear those doubts. The first and foremost is Ravindra Gadke. He says that where should be the entry point in type through? And before that, it is important to say that we have one more important question, that where should, sorry, Dr. Ravindra has asked that how to identify the spine. That is very important. Your entry point for the, so spine has to be identified.
Yes. So, I mean, your patient is in supine position, you flush water. There will be indentation in the center at around 6 o'clock or somewhere between 6 to 7 o'clock. And this indentation is a spinal indentation. And when you flush water, the water settles down, it gravitates in a supine position on the posterior side. So this is the area where you have to start your procedure. And this is not precisely a posterior poem. It is basically a posterolateral poem. If on degrees, if you ask me, you're some 10 degrees away from the spine. So it's a relatively posterolateral poem. The another question he asked was about type 3 poem. Their prominent peristalsis are there. So the most proximal peristalsis you have to identify, you have to be there for some time, and a centimeter proximal to the most proximal peristalsis should be the entry point, because you need to cut open all the strongly contracting muscles, then only patient is going to get good relief.
Another question from Ravindra again, because he's performing probably many patients, so he's asking it. Sometimes after bleb formation, sometimes it is difficult to locate posterior incision site. What to do in that case? So after the bleb formation, it is difficult to locate posterior incision site.
See, once having made a bleb position, almost like when we do ERCP, we have to get through the ampulla into the common bile duct, then there is no problem. Similarly, I have emphasized multiple times when I was talking about this, that when you make bleb, your bleb should be adequate, at least 20 cc of the injection should be there. And having made this bleb, you should be quick enough to enter inside, because if you don't do that, then it dissipates. And when the water dissipates, then your entry point becomes difficult. Having made this bleb, you have to cut open the muscularis mucosae. The real problem comes in that we have created an incision, but we have not done an adequate ledging. If you don't do adequate ledging, which means that your muscularis mucosae is still there. And this muscularis mucosae doesn't permit you to get inside the submucosal tunnel. So, and if you take more time in entering inside the submucosal tunnel, then the water which you have injected gets dissipated and your problems get complicated more and more. Therefore, ledging is an important thing. Once having done a ledging, then entry inside the submucosal tunnel becomes very, very easy.
One important point you which mentioned that while you are injecting, there should be you do EVL, there is a red out. So similarly, the whole area should become blue in front of you. Then only you are successful that you have made a good bleb. And there is another question that again from Ravindra: how to dissect submucosa very close to the muscle without injury to it? How to remain close?
Yeah, even if you do some kind of injury to the to the muscle, it doesn't really matter. On the contrary, I do intentional burning on the muscle while I'm making the tunnel, because that makes you aware that you are moving across the muscle and you're away from the mucosa. Some small amount of muscle injury while making submucosal tunnel would not really matter, because either way you're going to cut open this muscle. So don't be afraid of that. You have to be afraid of the injury to mucosa. You need not be afraid of any injury to the muscle.
You rightly mentioned that you are going to do a spray most of the times. He also wants to ask that spray with the RB needle, that is to be done with the RB needle too?
Yeah. So
spray.
Spray mode you can use with any needle. You can use it with TTJ. You can, if you have facility, then you can use Arbe knife as well. You see the cost of this procedure at those centers who are using Arbe comes to something like 2.5 lakh rupees, and we do it just for 70,000 rupees because this TTJ is a cheap equipment to use. So you have to appreciate that TTJ and this Arbe water jet doesn't really make a big difference. We have even quoted one study for this. So using a spray mode can be used with Arbe as well, water jet as well as with TTJ also.
Very rightly mentioned that cost is also to be taken care, because we are taking care of the patient. Next question is, branched gastric mucosa may not be visualized in case when lot of submucosal injection has been done. So what to do at that time?
Yeah, these vessels at the end of your tunnel towards the gastric side, you have to identify them very, very carefully, because any mistake at that point of time will be a nightmarish thing for all of us, because these are big vessels and they really bleed profusely, and the whole fields get read out, and then it is very difficult to tackle. And in that panic situation, when you start using your coagulation, and then you invite mucosal problems, and any mucosal problems at G's side will be really, really bad to have. Therefore, what I can suggest that your methylene blue concentration, how to assess that your methylene blue is adequate. What I personally do, you push this methylene blue in a test tube, and if you're able to see the other side is the right kind of methylene blue. If you're not able to see the other side of the test tube while you're pushed in methylene blue, which means too dark. Such too dark methylene blue can really impose problems in visualization of the vascular area inside a submucosal tunnel.
One more question to Dr. Alok also, that are muscle relaxants recommended to be given night before the POEM procedure?
No, sir. No muscle relaxant should be given prior.
Okay, only that is not.
Yeah.
Very
muscle
right.
Relaxant is a part of general anesthesia only, and smooth muscle relaxants may be due to the pain can be given by the gastroenterologist, but we don't recommend that. Anesthesia part is you cannot give muscle relaxants. Yeah.
Another important thing is that how to decide the direction of myotomy in stomach so that it does not bleed and reflux is less. So when, as you just mentioned, that you at G junction you are going to do the taking care of the resistance. That if you if you have some resistance, so just explain it again.
This is a very valid question. When we had shown that picture, when you see the posterior impression of the spine, the right side of the posterior impression of the spine is the area where you make an entry point for posterior POEM. On the left side of the spine, at the GE junction, is the angle of phase. So your myotomy should not cross the central area, which is the spine. Spinal impression. You can come back, you see the spinal impression again and go in, because this is the area where you have bundle of phase. Now, if you dissect on that area, your risk for GRD will probably be more. So be careful about the angle of phase, which is on the left side of the spinal impression on the posterior wall of the esophagus. So you have to stay on the right side of the spinal impression of the esophagus. At GE junction, it is difficult to appreciate the posterior and spinal impression. So you can come back and reorient yourself and avoid the left side of the spinal impression of the spinal compression on the esophagus.
We'll go away from this point and we'll ask Dr. Pankaj. There's a question from Dr. Smuktum Vagasia that when to do pneumatic dilatation in achalasia cardia. So is there any role now still left for achalasia cardia with pneumatic, because the cost is an important thing? So
Yes.
Pankaj.
It's a very nice question, and pneumatic balloon dilatation has been there since a long time, even before we started doing POEM, and as a less invasive approach as compared to Heller's myotomy. Now the problem in balloon dilatation is that now the idea behind treatment of POEM, because we are not treating the etiology, we are changing the physiology of the G junction. Basically, we are just cutting down the LES muscles so that the food goes inside the stomach by the effect of the gravity only. Now the idea behind destroying the LES muscle in pneumatic balloon dilatation is just like a crushing. When you just crush an apple or an onion by your thumb or by your fist of your hand, it's just like doing a pneumatic balloon dilatation. When you are doing a Heller's myotomy or doing a POEM procedure, you are doing a precise myotomy. So that carries the difference. Now, although the previous studies which was published in NEJ, and they have shown that the results of pneumatic balloon dilatation, they were very good even up to 3 to 5 years. But again, it can be as a less costly treatment approach for patients. But I would recommend doing a POEM or a Heller's myotomy, which carries a controlled, you can say, cutting down of the muscle. And especially in POEM, when you can do a longer myotomies and spastic esophageal disorders. Again, in pneumatic balloon dilatation, you are just doing, you can say, crushing down of the muscles of the LES. While in a POEM, you can do myotomies and you can cut down the muscles and spastic part also, which will give you good results. So I would recommend, say, for pneumatic balloon dilatations, the response rates are good in those who are having early achalasia, like type 2 achalasia, where the esophagus is relatively straight and the patient is young. And obviously the patient should be like, the surgical risk should be low, because in pneumatic balloon dilatation also you may have complications like perforation, and the patient may require even surgery in these patients. So the patient should be surgically fit. So it is type 2 achalasia and younger patient, you can go for a pneumatic balloon dilatation if the cost is an issue. But ideally, obviously, you should go for POEM or Heller's myotomy as a controlled excision. And in type 3 achalasia or spastic esophageal disorders, always go for a POEM, which has given better results as compared to any other modality.
Very nicely told that type 2 is the best for pneumatic one, and others, and there too also if one can afford, because sometimes after pneumatic dilatation, you may need a repeat procedure after some time. And in good olden times, it was talked about that achalasia cardia, you have to do a second with the, first you do with the 3 centimeter, then you do for the 4 centimeter. So 2 procedures were there. So it costed more. But in my clinical practice and for about 20-25 years, when we have been performing only pneumatic dilatation, the results were too good, and we published in endoscopy also that if you do adequately 3.5 centimeter dilatation, and we are able to achieve very successful dilatation. So time again, the procedures are changing, the results are changing. So probably it is a good thing to do for this. Dr. Mukesh,
Yes,
while doing tunnel severe fibrosis, how in patients with severe fibrosis, how to manage?
See, I mean, the intention of this particular webinar for POEM procedure was to be very, very careful while selecting your patient. So if you go through this paper, and if you go through the data of this paper, you will appreciate that, I mean, you will never encounter submucosal fibrosis grade 3 if you picked a patient of ABC EMI-A, and it will be just a cakewalk inside a submucosal tunnel. But if you picked up a wrong patient, and if you find a bad submucosal fibrosis, and if you're not able to lift it in spite of adequate pushing of methylene blue, you might have to cut down the procedure and come back and close the entry point. So selection of patient is important.
Selection is very, very important.
Yes.
I think we are too long in the whole process. There are so many questions still to be answered. I'll just ask Dr. Dhiren that should we go ahead or we can close it down?
So
Dr. Dhiren?
Would you like to take some more question?
We don't mind. Till
Okay,
the time
so-
all the participants are ready to hear. And there is a comment also which has come. Congratulations team for wonderful discussion. So I think people are still interested in listening to you. So we go ahead and
yes, sir.
And
Yes, sir.
we do some more questions. When to do anterior poem?
Yes.
Because you advocated posterior poem. When?
Yeah.
What is that indication?
Yeah, I mean, we have a paper from Innov's unit who says that anterior and posterior poem are equal. So in fact, we should reserve anterior poem for failure of posterior poem, number one. Number two, I mean, if like down the line when you get more experience with poem F and we have favorable data, if we at all we get it, then anterior poem is the only method of giving poem F, because you cannot do poem F with a posterior poem. The poem F is only possible by doing anterior approach. So what I personally suggest that if it is for the first time, it should be posterior poem only. If it is a failure, then it can be a anterior poem. And down the line, if poem F gets into use, which probably I have my doubts to it, but I do not know. I mean, we have to wait for the results. There are a couple of people who are energetically pursuing poem F to prevent GERD. So that is the area where anterior poem is the only option.
So another question is about from Dr. Smith Kumar, that how to manage megaesophagus, sigmoid esophagus.
Sir, the megaesophagus is for esophagectomy for sure. For sigmoid esophagus, I think, I mean, if it is complete S, then probably again, this patient goes for surgery. And if it is a partial S, then I think much more experienced people can attempt by doing smaller myotomy and smaller submucosal tunnel between the end of the beginning of the S till the G junction. So partial S is not a contraindication, complete S is absolute contraindication. So complete S, sigmoid esophagus would go for surgery. And esophagus for esophagectomy.
Another important thing is that while you are doing the manometry, you should try to find out whether the muscular contractions are present or not present. If there are no muscle contractions, there is no probably going to be use of even after doing this, because lot of us it will be remaining in the esophagus without any muscle contraction. So you have to decide that if it is megaesophagus and muscle contractions are not there, we should not attempt it. That goes for surgery. Another good question which has come is delayed bleeding after closing clip, when to suspect, prevalence and how to manage. Again, Dr. Smith Kumar has asked this question.
Yeah, I mean, if your patient suddenly develops tachycardia and chest pain, then we need to do an urgent CT scan for these patients. And if there is a mediastinal widening, then you have to go in again. You have to just remove the clips and enter inside the tunnel, do hemostasis, come back and place clips again. So this is a rare situation. Even when you, the big paper by, if you visit, the probability is less. But like, I mean, I think if there was less attention paid to hemostasis, then this kind of a problem can come up. But at least in our 100 patients, we've never ever encountered this problem. But yes, there are two clinical parameters will be sudden onset tachycardia and retrosternal chest pain. If you do a sudden hemoglobin fall and if you get to do a CT scan, then you can, find out that there is widening of the tunnel, because CT will be good enough to pick up. If it is really disturbing and if hemodynamic compromise is there, then you have to open the clip, enter inside the tunnel and clean it.
Very right. Another thing is that why do you use 4 or 5 clips? Can you use a Wasco clip?
Sir, Indians are already not that affording people. So when we started this procedure, we were like concerned that, considering putting against your pneumatic dilatation, the cost was a problem. Though in our part of the country, we are like as good as Heller's myectomy or maybe less than Heller's myectomy for doing a POEM procedure. But if you use Ovesco, then the cost would probably go up to number of times high. And hemo clips are very cheap, sir. There's just like 500 rupees a clip, and 4-5 clips are enough to control, close the entry point, which will be just like 2,500 rupees for the patient.
I think it's a very good cutting cost in favor of patient is going to be the success for this procedure, because lower the cost it would be, and affordability, it will increase the number of patients who are coming to you for the procedure. Another important thing which is coming forward is that regurgitation rate after POEM, how to manage it if it cause esophagitis, severe esophagitis.
So I think in follow-up, you should call these patients back and you should keep them on PPI for at least 6 to 8 weeks. In spite of PPI, if somebody is that symptomatic, then we need to go in again, do endoscopy and assess the, how bad is the esophagitis. In our good 100 patients, we have not encountered a single situation where somebody is bothered us saying that he has a, uncontrollable symptomatic esophagitis. We have not faced this problem. And I have a feeling as the data would pour in about the GERD in achalasia, which is one particular thing which is pulling POEM below LHM, we will have to classify GERD as symptomatic GERD, and this is a like laboratory GERD. Laboratory GERD would mean that if you do a pH study and if you assess that patient has GERD and you treat it, that is separate. But I don't think symptomatic GERD is significant into achalasia cardia patients underwent POEM procedure at all.
Dr. Kunal Das wants to know any special technique or precaution for sledging for entering the submucosal tunnel?
Yes, so that's a wonderful question, because I personally feel that as we started doing these procedures, there used to be a struggle in the beginning, and struggle was always at the end of the entry point. So there again, the TTJ knife comes in play beautifully. TTJ is intentionally made as a triangular knife, whereas, Urban knife is a round knife. So if this is the opening you have created and TTJ knife goes inside this, you just have to place it here and just bring your scope back and you will be doing ledging. The most important thing about ledging is that you have to get rid of the muscularis mucosae. This muscularis mucosae is very tough at times and you are not able to dissect it. If you are not able to dissect muscularis mucosae, then you cannot enter inside the tunnel. So there are two things: do ledging, which means that cut open the muscularis mucosae, and the submucosa at the distal end of the entry point should be dissected so that you can start seeing the muscle there. So then having done this, the entry point will be like a cakewalk, I'm sure.
Very nice. I think everything is, if you hook the things very well, you can take the whole thing up in the air. So I think hooking is very important. So when you're putting your knife there and into the muscle, you're trying to hook it. What precautions for managing the proper direction of the submucosal tunneling?
Yes. Yeah, this is a very relevant question, sir. So when you're doing a submucosal tunneling, particularly for those esophagus which are hugely dilated, you tend to lose your way. So you have to remember that in such particular situation where the dilatation is too big, then you will tend to lose your way sideways instead of going towards the GE junction. So what precaution you should take? You should keep the muscle at the between 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock position, and your scope should be moving at 6 o'clock position. So which is to say that your scope should be perpendicular to the direction of the circular muscle. So if you keep your scope perpendicular at 6 o'clock position, keeping one end of the muscle at 3 and keeping the other end at 6 o'clock position, and if you keep your scope at 6 o'clock position, you are unlikely to lose your way. But if you have a dilated esophagus and if you do not follow this principle, in that case, you can invite problems for yourself, particularly when esophagus is hugely dilated. And in such dilated esophagus, you tend to lose your way. Instead of approaching towards GE, you will probably go laterally and you will probably struggle. Imagine a situation, if you start going laterally, then you will not remain perpendicular to the circular muscle. So the bottom line and the carry-home message is, keep your scope at 6 o'clock position and keep muscle at between 3 to 6 o'clock position. In between, you can flush water. The water will gravitate at 6 o'clock position, and that is the area where you should stay.
Very nicely explained, and I must congratulate and say thanks to all our enthusiastic participants who have been asking such good questions, because they are themselves doing it and they find it sometimes difficulties which need to be clarified with the expert also. And another important thing is that what things you do in post dilation poem?
Yes. So see, you get three kinds of patients. You get a naive patient or a virgin patient to say that he's not undergone any kind of procedure. Your approach in submucosal tunnel will be easy. You get a patient who has undergone a couple of times balloon or single time balloon or maybe a Heller's myotomy. So in these situations, as you will go close to the GE junction, you will find a lot of fibrosis. So your time consumed will be more, but usually it doesn't pose too serious a problem, because you need more injection into that area. And you just have to be very careful, because the two important things into post-procedural POEM patient, vascularity becomes higher because of the injury reaction, and fibrosis is there because of the injury reaction. So your time consumed in these patients will be little higher, but adequate, there should be a liberal injection of methylene blue instilled water inside the submucosal area, so as to keep mucosa away from the muscle and keep dissecting.
I think now I just saw Dhiren on the screen. Dhiren, what do you say? Should we go ahead? It is 9:50.
Sir,
we can conclude, sir.
I think, may I suggest you, Dhiren?
Yes, sir.
You can share my mobile number with the participants who have come here. If anybody has any queries, my mobile number is 98290-50622. So I will repeat my number, which is 98290-50622. So if anybody has a problem, then my WhatsApp number is open 24/7. So I'll be happy to answer to any queries, which because of limited time, we are not able to answer.
Thank you all the participants for taking out your time and listening to in the area of the new era of endoscopy. And we believe next week also you will be there with us, and more participants. There are participants from all over the world, Australia and a few more countries who have been watching this webinar. Thank you everybody, and congratulations to all the three speakers for taking out us through the journey of a new dimension in the treatment of achalasia cardia. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.
And Dhiren,
yes, sir.
Yeah, Dhiren, may I give a personal invitation to all of those people who are watching this by conveying thanks, and I request them to join us on next Friday, same time and same day again on next Friday, because we are going to talk about a new equipment, which is SPY-DA scope and cholangioscopy. This is a milestone equipment which has really changed the scenario of hepatobiliary problems. Now we are not operating Whipples without any tissue diagnosis, and we have stopped doing CVD explorations for the patients. This is a milestone equipment. We were afraid about the cost of the equipment, but believe my words, we will discuss tips and tricks where you will appreciate that even cost would probably not matter. How to bring cost, we will also share those ideas with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. I thank Dr. Mukesh Kalla, Dr. Pankaj Semal, and Dr. Alok Verma for this excellent insight, I think, in the management of POEM. And I wholeheartedly thank Dr. Ramesh Rai for so beautifully moderating this session. We would like to also thank all the clinicians for sparing your valuable time and joining us for this online webinar program. I hope all of you have liked the program. If you like the program, you can let us know. You can write your comment in the comment box. Now, this is the end of this webinar. Thank you once again and have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Have good sleep.
Bye. Bye. Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.